This is one of the first years since 2016 that Bitcoin is turning a negative return relative to the overall market on a year-to-date basis, but it's barely so, right? So this could correct itself in very short term. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about what you need to know before the bell this morning. Expect this week to be a little bit sloppy trading. We're still kind of going through distributions right now, so a little bit weaker market would not be surprising at all. But overall, markets are doing fine. We're up about 17% for the year so far. We're encroaching up here to all-time highs in the markets. Again, a nice consolidation here over the last, kind of really month of the markets, despite, this correction that we had, this 5% pullback. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, the markets are dying here, everything's over. That was just part of this kind of consolidation process from this very strong advance. We talked about this last week. Big, strong advance from the April lows. You've been consolidating those gains here just a little bit over the last few weeks. So again, none of that's really surprising at all. That really does kind of set the markets up here for a little bit further rally. But again, to have a little bit of a pullback here would not be surprising. To have a little bit of a pullback over the next week or two before we actually get to the Christmas holiday. A little bit of profit taking here. Wouldn't be surprising. You're a little bit overbought on a relative strength basis. Not exceedingly overbought, but we are overbought. So again, a little bit of a pullback, a little bit more consolidation, a little bit of sloppy trading. Then that would set up, kind of reduce that relative strength overbought condition, and that would set up the buying power, so to speak, for that kind of last 5 days of the year. We start doing portfolio positioning and window dressing. Doesn't have to be the case at all. But again, that wouldn't be surprising. So again, I would just be a little bit cautious with your risk taking here over the next week or so. Could be a little bit sloppy. Light trading as we get closer to holidays because of professional traders are going to start leaving for the holidays starting next week. Kids are coming home from college. So, all that's happening, right? So just, kind of keep this in mind. We're still on a buy signal at the moment. Again, no real risk here to be paying attention, that suggests the market's trying to have another big sell-off. Again, just, markets are doing fine here. We break out of this consolidation, markets can make a further advance, to new highs, here by year end. Now, outside of that, one of the other things that is going on, and, we haven't seen this in a while, but Bitcoin has been actually struggling a bit this year, as you know, of course. This is one of the first years since 2016 that Bitcoin is turning a negative return relative to the overall market on a year-to-date basis, but it's barely so, right? So this could correct itself in very short term. But right now, the market's up 17%. Bitcoin's down about 1.9% for the year. That doesn't happen very often because Bitcoin is a risk asset, so it tends to track. It tends to be more highly correlated to the S&P 500. So whatever's going on here with Bitcoin, as we talked about last week, it's getting fairly oversold here. In fact, last week we said you probably had a pretty decent entry point into Bitcoin here, just from the standpoint it's extremely oversold. You're starting to get a little bit of an uptick in performance in Bitcoin. It's been trying to struggle higher here. It's been a little bit volatile on this rally, but is something that we're starting to see a little bit better improvement in. So you are starting to see you're back on a MACD buy. So this is what we talked about last week. We said, hey, you're getting a MACD buy signal here. Relative strength was oversold, going to start to improve. So Bitcoin's been trying to struggle higher here. You still got room to move up to about 98,000 on Bitcoin. And if that occurs, that should correspond with a stronger rally for the S&P. Again, since Bitcoin tends to be correlated to the S&P and particularly the NASDAQ as a risk asset, if we start to see better improvement in kind of speculative risk taking in Bitcoin, that should also translate over into better returns for the S&P 500 going into year end. But again, as with the S&P, a lot of managers that do have Bitcoin in their portfolio want to make sure they've got that exposure at market weight. After this correction, a lot of managers that have that exposure may be underweight that. So again, like the S&P, there should be a little bit of a lift into year end in cryptocurrencies as well. So again, that's what you need to know before the bell this morning.